Good morning, everyone, and to those who have joined us here in Strasbourg and to those who are watching us live streamed around the world. It's going to be a terrific two-day event. I'll try and do my best to keep it engaging and lively and ensure everyone, you especially out there, keep to your schedules. We're being streamlined live on YouTube, Make Our Planet Great Again, joint French-German scientific program. This is, of course, the midway point of the Make Our Planet Great Again project. And so we already know the dark forecast if we do nothing. So I think we're all keen to know how your research has developed and for you to share some of the early results and solutions that you have if we are indeed to make our planet great again. This event, as we all know, should have been held last year, but there was some sort of virus that came in and interrupted. But we are here, we're delighted, we're ready to go. We also have fantastic Guillaume over here, who was with us in Paris, you may remember. He's our cartoon sketcher, who will be taking little notes and showing what we're all like, and he'll be displaying his cartoons throughout the 2 days that we're here. So that should be fantastic. And with no further delay, I'd like to hand over to Christina Richards. She is a laureate at the Institute of Evolution and Ecology at the University of Tübingen, and her focus is on global change biology. She has volunteered to open this session with me, or she was volunteered. I'm not really sure which one it was, but anyway, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Chris. I think it went sort of both ways, but we can talk about that later. It's really fabulous to be here, and I'm so happy to see you all in person. It's been a long time. It's been a long time coming. We've put a lot of work into this, including the laureates who've all helped participate in making this a great program, so I'm very excited that it's finally happening. And as an example, this is one of Guillaume's creations here that he made for us, particularly for this welcoming event. So thank you, Guillaume. We look forward to your graphics. As a reminder, Macron started the MOPCA program in 2017. Angela Merkel soon joined him on the German side, and the goal there was to figure out how we can contribute to reaching the Paris Agreement targets. And to do so, we were charged with facilitating research, building networks, supporting policymakers, assuming responsibility for what was going on, and intensifying cooperation among scientists. Quite a large task, really. To that end, we met in Paris, and there we had welcome addresses from our French and German science ministers, who we'll hear from again today. We had 4 keynote speakers and 8 laureates from the program who presented sessions on global changes in general, as well as the 3 categories that were funded originally: the Earth system science, climate change and global sustainability, and the energy transition. Moving forward to this midterm conference, the laureates elected a scientific board. You can see the members here on the right-hand side of the slide. And we were charged with coming up with a way to synthesize these 50 projects, more than 50 projects, to make them, is it still working? To make them a storyline about how we're contributing to global change. We decided as a group, after about a year, well, halfway through the year that we've been planning this, that we really wanted to highlight all of the MOPCA projects so that we could all see what each of us is doing. We wanted to provide an opportunity for exchange among the laureates, which is an important part of moving forward with the synthesis. And we also wanted to reach the public. We were grateful to have the CNRS, Stefan Blanc and Brigitte Gaillard, as well as the DAAD, Ursula Hardenbecker and Rana Garabay there, helping us along the way, keeping us on task. So we quickly realized that these 4 categories were simply not doing the job of telling a nice story. We were charged with thinking of how do we come up with an integrated storyline across 50-plus projects in the MOPCA program. It took quite some time, but we had some really wonderful discussions, and we settled on this structure that you'll see in the coming days, today and tomorrow: understanding, assessing, and mitigating the effects of global change. So in particular, we'll have the first 2 sessions today. The first will be on understanding processes of global change, which include looking at past climate processes, as well as current climate, and the challenges of modeling these processes, assessing the impacts of global change on biodiversity, natural ecosystems, as well as human-natural coupled systems. And tomorrow we'll hear about mitigating the effects of global change with solutions, both technological as well as social and political solutions. On behalf of the scientific board, I would like to thank all of the MAPCA laureates for helping us to make this a really unique program, as well as the CNRS and the DAAD for really supporting what we were trying to do with this conference. Of course, we thank Chris Bachman, who has not only volunteered to moderate this conference, but he also helped coach us in how to make our 5-minute talks more powerful. And of course, Guillaume Monin, who has done the drawings in Paris, the drawings for my talk today, which are quite fabulous, and we'll see more from him as the conference unfolds. And with that, here we go.
Thanks, Christina. We'll, of course, be hearing from you a lot more later. There will be plenty of opportunity for you to question the laureates here if you have questions in this auditorium. And, of course, online, you can also send your questions to us, and, of course, our laureates will answer those questions. We're, of course, at the University of Strasbourg, CNRS, on the campus. And so it seems totally right that we should ask the president of the University of Strasbourg to come and say a few words. Michel Deniken, come over. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm really happy and honored to welcome you to the European School of Chemistry, Polymers and Materials of the University of Strasbourg. To mark the common will on both sides of the Rhine to collaborate for MOPGA, what place is more symbolic than the city of Strasbourg, European capital, but also a city where reconciliation, then Franco-German collaboration, has become a reality as emblematic as dynamic. As such, I would like to greet and thank Antoine Petit, the president of CNRS, our both ministers of higher education from Germany and France. I thank and congratulate the organizers and partners for choosing the University of Strasbourg to this great event. The intuition of MOPGA initiative is based on the conviction that science knows no borders. And the motto of our excellence initiative in the University of Strasbourg was beyond the frontiers. So we are on the right place this morning. And in order not to remain in the vague discourse and the good intentions, nothing better than to rub shoulders with the reality of a border which has long divided and was the source of incessant wars. The school where we are hosted develops talents to promote a creative and responsible chemistry in an international context. If you go on the website of this school, the director says she has 12 good reasons to make you choose ECPM. I think there are more than 12 reasons. But it's a very interesting institution because it's an inner engineering school of a university. It's not so frequent in France. We are also in the right place for MOPGA because at this school, research is the foundation of engineering education, principally with CNRS. 3 of our 4 Nobel Prizes are Nobel Prize of Chemistry, and they are teaching and searching presently in our university. And one of them is a former student and teacher of this school. And one of the researchers who came to join our university within the framework of MOPGA, Amir Hoveida, is also a chemist in catalytic chemical synthesis. This world-class research advances science, breaks down borders between peoples and also between disciplines. Indeed, interdisciplinarity is at the heart of teaching and researching in this school and in a larger view in our university. Finally, you are also in the right place because this school is strongly committed to sustainability, and not only for a few months or years, since the beginning. It is a pioneer in its pedagogy and in the forefront of research. This is thanks to the presence of research organizations such as CNRS. This school, therefore, participates day after day in the excellence of scientific research and the training of engineers who carry the world of tomorrow at the end of their test tubes, their benches, and their fume cupboards. If we want to make our planet great again, ladies and gentlemen, the best investment is in our students and researchers. They are the ones who, in the end, are the ones who are already doing MOPCA. They show us that chemistry sometimes contributes to the degradation of the planet, but chemistry will also be one of the principal means of recovering it. Let's stop bashing chemistry. Let us invest in our students who must live with courage and enthusiasm the challenges of our planet. Let us support researchers and teachers so that they are able to pave the way for daring and resilient science. The University of Strasbourg belongs to the University of Upper Rhine with Karlsruhe, with Freiburg, Breisgau, with Basel in Switzerland and Mulhouse in France, is one of the great achievements which has built a definitive bridge between three residents of the Rhine. At the heart of this reality is the Franco-German agreement. We know that Europe is doing well when the Franco-German couple is doing well. The same goes for academic collaboration with great institutions like CNRS or INSERM. We have to challenge this wonderful MOPCA initiative here concretely. As president of the University of Strasbourg, I'm happy to open this session, and you can be sure that my commitment with my team to win the struggle for life in our planet will find here one of these realizations. I said the main investment we have to do is to invest into research, but at first into researchers. So I thank all our teachers and researchers to be able to give their enthusiasm, to transmit their culture of science as also like a commitment as citizens, because at least we have to give again to the society what society invests in our schools, in our labs. That means the solutions to have a planet that will continue to be sustainable, to be able to welcome babies who are to be born, because they are our future. I think no future is a slogan of the past and a slogan for lazy people. I thank you to have chosen Strasbourg for this wonderful moment of collaboration between France and Germany. You know that Strasbourg is the seat of the European Parliament, where we made war, we can make peace. There is the good place to be, and I thank you to be with us to make a focus on the excellency of the research in our wonderful school, in our wonderful university.
Thank you, Mr. Illigan. We're honored to have the chairman and CEO of the CNRS, who's come very early this morning from Paris. Over to you.
Jean-Michel, dear colleagues, It's really a pleasure to participate to open this midterm scientific conference on the Make Our Planet Great Again research program, launched, as you know, in 2017 by both France and Germany. And this is clearly a timely conference held right after the Conference of Parties, the COP26 conference in Glasgow. COP after COP, we scientists find ourselves in the midst of historical and game-changing times. The challenge that lies ahead is to find strategies mitigating the effects of global change, including the climate emergency. This reflects the long-standing effort required to transform the scientific knowledge into action and solutions for our societies. The impact of human activities on the environment, be it direct on land use and biodiversity, for example, or indirect on climate change and global warming, is not new. In the later 40s, the ecologist Fairfield Osborn was the first to question the sustainability of Earth's resources in the context of post-war exponential economic growth, which are nowadays referred to the notion of planetary boundaries. Interestingly, it was during this post-war period that contemporary scientists, such as John Rockstrom, defined the start of the Great Acceleration. This acceleration in human activities concern all aspects of economic growth and lifestyle and mirrored the evolution of CO2 in the atmosphere. Causality is nowadays hard to question. The IPCC was created in 1988 since then scientists objectively report studies after studies the impact of human activities on the functioning of the Earth system. In 2007, the IPCC was awarded by the Peace Nobel Prize for this work, and I am very happy to have a picture of the Nobel Prize in my iPhone, because in fact my father was one of the members of the IPCC at this time. You can check if you don't believe me. And this was a proud of the family, of course, as you understand. But this was, to be more serious or more general, this was a major recognition of achievements, but also a recognition of the challenges to come. It highlighted the strong link between climate change and peace around the world. It is interesting to note that COP after COP, summits after summits, there has been a significant change in the paradigm through which climate change was considered. As scientists, we need to better understand the complexity of social ecosystems, disseminate them to decision makers, and help find solutions. Sustainability sciences could be a way to tackle global challenges. Initially driven by climate science, scientists from all disciplines gradually joined the IPCC work. They are also involved in special reports like the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate or climate change and land, revealing the interactions with the social ecosystems. Nowadays, climate and other global change are addressed in almost every country through an integrated approach of Earth and social systems, using strongly revisited interdisciplinary and even transdisciplinary researches. Climate changes is currently one of the 6 societal challenges that the CNRS decided to study and prioritize. In the international arena, with key co-actors such as the World Climate Research Programme, the IPCC, and IPBES, and several others, including, of course, Further Earth, in which we are strongly involved, the CNRS tried to fill the gap between science, business, civil society, and policy, by promoting and developing research with co-design, co-produce, and co-delivers, and which is solution-oriented to achieve global sustainability. MOBGA was therefore built as a unique program fostering all dimensions of transdisciplinary research applied to global sustainability. When the MOBGA program was launched in 2017 by the President Macron and followed by the German Chancellor Merkel, we understood the gravity of the United States withdrawal from the Paris Agreement. This withdrawal put a halt to the first agreement made by most countries to contain global heat by 1.5 degrees. The program invited top-level scientists, from all over the world to come to France and Germany to develop research programs on global change. It targeted Earth system science, but also the relationships between climate change and global sustainability, and also energy transition. More than 10,000 people, including more than 5,000 students and researchers, expressed their interest to these programs on the Élysée website. 434, it's very precise, scientists applied to the research program. A strong selection was realized by the CNRS on the scientific achievements of the candidate, and only 90 were allowed to submit a research project to the French Agence Nationale de la Recherche, which selected 43 laureates, and in Germany, 13 laureates were selected. And among the selected candidates, there are Americans, Canadians, Germans, Greeks, Italians, Moldavians, French, Spanish, British, Japanese people, and a few others. The program is a real success and use a win-win strategy. Top-level international scientists join top-level French and German laboratories where they develop common cutting-edge research projects. Regrouping prominent international scientific figures into stimulating environments, such as French and German labs, fostered innovative research and solutions for adaptation. We are here today to witness the midterm achievements of the program. As you will see, the format selected by the scientific board is quite unique. They will present their results in a way revealing how they help assessing, understanding, and proposing solutions to global change. They use a storytelling format in between the format of my thesis in 180 seconds and a TED talk. I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to this program, and I will conclude by emphasizing the successful collaboration between France and Germany in the management of the program, the involvement of the scientific committee of the conference, who did a great job in building this original conference, the implication, of course, of our German colleagues from DADD in the organization of conference, and the University of Strasbourg, Cher Michel, who is hosting the conference. I would like to finish with special thanks to Brigitte Gaillard from the interdisciplinary mission of the CNRS, who took in hands very efficiently the whole organization of the conference locally, a quite challenging task in a not fully recovered epidemic crisis. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Petit. We can't stress enough that this is a Franco-German partnership financed by both, and so it just makes sense for us to hear from the two ministers from both countries. So we have a recorded message from Anja Kadacek, who's the German Federal Minister for Education and Research, which we can listen to now, I hope.
Sehr geehrte Gäste und vor allem liebe MOBGA-Fellows. Weniger Methan ausstoßen, weniger Bäume fällen, Ökosysteme schützen. Das alles geht in die richtige Richtung. Und trotzdem hat die Weltklimakonferenz in Glasgow gezeigt, es bleibt noch viel zu tun, bis wir klimaneutral leben und wirtschaften können. Und deshalb begrüße ich den Klimapakt der USA und China. Wir brauchen solche starken Initiativen auch aus Europa. Die EU-Kommission hat das Thema ganz vorn auf der Agenda. Wir haben ehrgeizige Ziele. Und wir müssen jetzt zügig vorankommen. Und da setze ich auf den bewährten deutsch-französischen Motor. Die Frage ist, mit welchem Treibstoff geben wir Gas? Und hier ist die Forschung gefragt. Wir können das mit dem Treibstoff wörtlich nehmen. Grüner Wasserstoff ist ein ganz gutes Beispiel dafür. Ambitionierte Forschung und Entwicklung haben es möglich gemacht, dass bereits erfolgversprechende Modellprojekte mit diesem Treibstoff der Zukunft laufen. Und natürlich gilt das Bild vom Treibstoff auch im übertragenen Sinn für alles, was uns beim Klimaschutz ordentlich Anschub gibt. Gleichzeitig verstehen wir dank der Wissenschaft besser, wie der Klimawandel mit den menschengemachten Emissionen und extremen Wetterereignissen zusammenhängt. Das Hochwasser in Deutschland und Frankreich in diesem Sommer und die Dürren und Brände angesichts steigender Temperaturen. Sie zeigen uns doch, was künftig häufiger auf uns zukommt. Sie zeigen, warum Initiativen wie Make Our Planet Great Again wichtig sind. Klimaschutz gelingt nur in gemeinschaftlicher Anstrengung, als Gemeinschaftsprojekt. Mit unseren Nachbarländern, innerhalb der Europäischen Union, als globale Staatengemeinschaft. Es wird dabei auch immer Konflikte geben, das ist normal. Doch es lohnt sich, um einen gemeinsamen Weg zu kämpfen. Mit Wissenschaft und Forschung können wir gerade auch die sozialen Folgen des Umbruchs gestalten. Und liebe Mopka Fellows, mir ist die Aufbruchsstimmung bei unserer ersten Konferenz so gut im Gedächtnis geblieben. Sie haben Ihre Projekte seitdem entschlossen und hoch engagiert vorangetrieben. Und mit Ihren Ideen und Arbeiten in der Klima-, Energie- und Erdsystemforschung können wir unseren Planeten nachhaltiger gestalten und im besten Sinne wieder great machen. Ihre Beispiele zeigen, wie das gelingen kann, wie wir etwa Nahrungsmittel zu geringeren Umweltkosten und mit niedrigerem CO2-Ausstoß produzieren. Oder wie wir mit neuartigen, superdünnen Halbleitern ganz neue Möglichkeiten der Energieerzeugung erschließen. Das Bundesministerium für Bildung und Forschung weitet seine Förderung für Klimaschutz und Nachhaltigkeit erheblich aus. Dafür sind die Weichen bereits gestellt. Über die Forschung für Nachhaltigkeitsstrategie sollen in den kommenden 5 Jahren 4 Milliarden Euro in die Forschung für Nachhaltigkeit fließen. Und damit verdoppeln wir die Zuwendung für diesen Schwerpunkt. Auch Mopka und ihre Projekte werden in der FONA-Strategie gefördert. Sie bringen uns den globalen Nachhaltigkeitszielen der Vereinten Nationen einen wichtigen Schritt näher. Mopka steht jedoch nicht nur für innovative Forschung und internationale Zusammenarbeit, sie leben und tragen diese Initiative. Sie füllen Mopka mit Leben und genau daraus wächst ein ganz enger Zusammenhalt. Der wird noch lange und weit über das Programm hinaus Antrieb für gute Forschung zum Wohl unseres Planeten sein. Und in diesem Sinne wünsche ich Ihnen allen gemeinsam ganz viel Erfolg.
So the French Minister of Higher Education, Research and Innovation, Frédéric Vidal, also sent a recorded message, but in French, so I had to use my skills to translate it. So let's see if I can get the ad-lib correct. So let's listen to hers, and I'll try and translate it in real time.
Mesdames, Messieurs, de Léonard de Vinci à
Ladies and
Hubert
gentlemen,
Reeves,
from
en passant
Leonardo
par
da
Marie
Vinci to
Curie,
Hubert Reeves
la France a
and Marie
toujours
Curie,
accueilli des
France has always
scientifiques venus
welcomed
d'ailleurs,
scientists from around the
célèbres
world,
ou plus discrets,
whether they were
qui ont
famous or
marqué
worked
son
discreetly.
histoire et
Nevertheless,
grandement
they played a key
contribué
role
à
in
sa
their field and
culture
helped
et à son
France with
rayonnement.
its cultural advancement and
C'est une
influence
tradition
internationally.
française et nul ne saurait y contrevenir.
And that will not change.
Le programme Make
The
Our Planet
program
Great
Make Our
Again
Planet Great
ne fait pas
Again is no
exception.
exception.
Depuis 2017
Ever
et
since the
l'appel
President
du
of the French
président de la
Republic
République
appealed
aux
back in
chercheurs du
2017
monde
for
entier
researchers around the
qui
planet
viennent
to come and
travailler en
work in France,
ce sont 42
42
chercheurs de
top-level
haut niveau et
researchers
dans
and
leur
57
sillage,
students in their wake
57
have
étudiants au
benefited from a
postdoc
very
étranger
warm welcome
qui
on
ont
our
pu
territory
bénéficier d'un
to
accueil sur
continue
notre
their vital
territoire
research.
pour poursuivre leurs travaux de recherche. Certains de ces femmes et de ces
Most
hommes
of these,
engagés venus
many
des
of these
quatre coins
determined
du
women and
monde
men from all corners of
travaillaient
the
dans les
planet
plus
work in some of the most
prestigieuses
prestigious universities that exist.
Ce programme n'aurait pas été
This
possible
program wouldn't have been
sans l'apport
possible
de nos amis
without the
allemands que
support
je
of our
voudrais
German
remercier
friends
ici
and
ce
partners,
matin, et
and I
dont
want
la
to thank them
contribution
today and
permet
point out their help
d'accueillir 13
allowed
lauréats
13 more
supplémentaires
laureates
au
to
sein
join
de
the
ce
program.
Je souhaite aussi
I also want to
particulièrement
thank all
saluer
those
et
research
remercier
labs that have
l'engagement de nos
participated
établissements de recherche
and singled out the
et en premier
CNRS,
lieu
which
le
provided a
CNRS,
home for these
qui accueille
researchers.
ces chercheurs en leur sein. Sans vous,
Without
ce
this,
programme
this
n'existerait
program
pas.
simply wouldn't exist.
La diversité des origines
The
et de
diversity
cultures de
and
ces
background
chercheurs
of the
n'a d'égal
researchers
que
is
celle
matched
de
by the
leur
wide range of specialities you will
économie,
cover,
agronomie,
whether it's economics,
sciences de
agriculture,
l'ingénieur et
systems
système
engineering, or land systems.
Pourtant, Tous
You
sont
all have the
engagés
same
dans un
common
même
goal and
objectif
aim
qui vise
to
ce
understand, slow down, and
comprendre,
reduce climate change
ralentir et
so that the
diminuer
planet
le
can make its
changement
energy
climatique
transition.
pour accompagner le monde dans sa transition énergétique. Notre pays se veut leader dans
France
ce
wants to
domaine.
be a leader in
Et pour
this
cela,
field,
il faut donner
and in
aux
order to
chercheurs,
succeed,
aux
scientists,
enseignants-chercheurs,
researchers, and
aux
students
étudiants, aux
must have the
personnels
desire to
scientifiques,
come and work
l'envie
and
de
study in
venir y
France
travailler, mais aussi
and
l'envie
stay
d'y
here
rester.
for the long term.
Nous avons besoin de toutes les forces vives de notre pays.
We need all the
et de
talent
la
that this country
multitude de
has
talents
and
qui fait
generates.
germer. Cette
Making
attractivité
France
scientifique
attractive
de
for
la France
scientists is a
est un
big
défi
challenge,
collectif
and we're succeeding
que
in
nous avons
making it
su
happen.
relever. Et c'est désormais un pari que nous sommes en passe de réussir. La loi de programmation de la
A
recherche
new
que j'ai
law that I
portée
pushed
l'année
through Parliament
dernière
last year is
s'inscrit
part of that
pleinement dans cette
ambition.
dynamique. Cette
This
loi
new
rend
law
plus
makes
attractives
university
les
careers
carrières
more attractive
universitaires, notamment
by
en
raising salaries
revalorisant
of
les salaires des
researchers or
chercheurs,
permitting
ou
others
encore
to
en
make a
facilitant
career
l'entrée
in
dans la
university
carrière
research
avec
with the
la
creation
création
of
des
new
chaires de
posts of
professeurs
junior
libres.
professor.
Les trois
The
objectifs
three goals
identifiés
singled
au
out at the
début
beginning
de
of
ce
this program,
la
a centre of
conduite
research
d'une
excellence with
l'accroissement du
wide
rayonnement
impact
de
and
la recherche
influence of
française,
France-based
et
research
l'ancrage de la
and grounded in the
thématique
theme of ecology
sont aussi
makes
les
up
fruits de
all
tout
of the
l'écosystème
ecosystem of
français de la
senior-level
recherche
teaching
et
and
de
research.
l'enseignement supérieur. La France a vocation
France
à
has the
être
ambition to be a
ce pays où on
country where we
travaille
work
main dans la
together
main.
collectively, hand in
Chercheurs
hand,
français et chercheurs
researchers from
sénégalais,
France and across borders,
scientifiques et
as
citoyens,
scientists and citizens to
pour
take
prendre nos
responsibility and take
et
on the
affronter
major
les
climate
grands
challenges
enjeux
today with
avec
renewed
un
drive
enthousiasme
and enthusiasm.
renouvelé. Je vous souhaite des échanges.
I hope you all have very
Je
useful
vous remercie
exchanges
pour
and
votre
thank you for your
engagement sans
determination
faille
and engagement
afin de relever
to
ce
take
qui
on the
sans
biggest
doute
challenge
le plus
that
grand
humanity
défi
faces
que
today.
notre humanité a eu à affronter.
And with that, I'm delighted that we can go straight to our first keynote speakers. And first is Jérôme Chave from the Evolution and Biology Diversity Laboratory based in Toulouse and leading figure in the field of tropical ecology. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for the attendance of the two presidents of the University of Strasbourg and CNRS. So it was great to have welcome from the two ministers of Germany and France. I would like to start by saying that our European countries have grown with forests. Their political structure, the states have grown because of forest, actually. And wood was a crucial feature, the crucial energy at the time. And it's been a bit forgotten now that how important forests have been for the building of our society and our cultures. And this is also a bit forgotten that the forests have been crucial and so important, actually, that the notion that forests are associated with catastrophes has always been present in our culture. In 18th century Germany, there was the fear of wood shortage was really strong there, and later on in 19th century, fear of climate-related deforestation, changes in climate due to deforestation was also a very important feature of it was all over a newspaper in the early 19th century in France. So those phenomena are not new, and while we're talking about make our planet great again, and we have this sense of urgency, we have this sense that we have to act really quick. I think one of the messages of science is really to pinpoint the fact that science takes time, and we have to reflect not only into the strategies for the future, new technology, but also into our past. And forests are a great invitation for doing this. So without further delay, how do I go ahead with my slides? Do I ask for next slide? I may have this, to use this. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. So tropical forests are really diverse, and you all know this. So it's not only this classic, most tropical forest that you know about and that CNRS has invested in French Guiana, for instance, with the Nourag field station. It's also a very diverse system of of flooded forest, dry forest, mountain forest. And so I want you to bear in mind this diversity when I talk about tropical forest. Also, it goes without saying that the real problem of biodiversity is in the tropics. Most of biodiversity is in the tropics. So when we think about a European strategy for preserving and for mitigating the erosion of biodiversity, we really have to take a global perspective and not only a regional perspective. Most of the problems are and will be in the tropics. Now, the outline of my talk, really quickly, I'd like to discuss threats on tropical forests and opportunity as well. So the one point you all know about is that tropical forests are vanishing at not such a fast pace, but a regular pace. What's amazing in the slide that I show to you today, covering Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia mostly, is not only that the erosion of biodiversity is present, but also it's completely linear, meaning that even though there are many economic, political factors in place, they all act one after the other, having exactly the same effect. This in itself is kind of a surprise, actually. Now, the drivers of tree forest loss are well known as well. One of them is the globalization of commodities, and especially in Latin America, and we know from really recent news from Brazil, most of the deforestation in Brazil is due to global communities. It's the same in Southeast Asia. Africa has a very different story, so we should bear in mind that we talk about deforestation in the tropics, we talk about really different realities, economically, politically, and also in terms of trade. So these are really important features to bear in mind into making a global strategy. Now, what we can do as countries and as partners is to quantify how much is, what are the consequences of this deforestation on our economies and how much we're responsible. This is the concept of imported deforestation that you certainly are well aware about. And right now, the data that I show that unambiguously deforestation over the past almost couple of decades are due to cattle ranching and land use change due to the beef, basically, globalization. And so these ideas are really important to put into place strategies. But what's quite important, actually, to understand is that when you look into the longer picture, this data are from Brazil. The first thing that are interesting in this data is, in this slide, is that you see that there's been two peaks in deforestation in Brazil. One of them was related to soy cultivation in the early 2000s, and the second one is the wave we are in right now, which has strongly a political component, but also an economic one. And those are different realities. Before that, we had a really massive deforestation in Southeast Asia with oil palm plantation, which is almost over now because the full potential of oil palm plantation has been realized, actually, in Southeast Asia. So all of these complexities need to be taken into account when we think about what deforestation does to our planet and what could be the consequences. As an aside, another feature that's interesting in this picture is that exactly the same data give rise to very different numbers. And deforestation is actually a complex quantity to quantify, because small-scale deforestation is difficult to measure with the optical satellite data, because optical satellite data, as you know, don't go through clouds, and this means that we miss a lot of features. This is why you have such many differences in observations for the moment. The other threat that many of you are much more expert than I am is the climatic threat. And we've heard a lot about this tipping point effect in tropical ecosystems whereby the aridification of Amazonia due to deforestation may lead to a different climatic system and in turn will snowball into an effect of deforestation, natural deforestation through a dieback effect of the Amazon. This is a very important, potentially a very important phenomenon to study. But I'd like to bear in mind that this phenomenon is by no means sure or clear or very well understood. For one thing, we don't understand how tropical trees respond to drought so well. and it needs a lot of time and a lot of patience and effort for scientific teams to understand this phenomenon. And the second aspect is, of course, to be able to develop models that do the job. So in Germany with the LPG, the LPG model, vegetation model, and in France the Orchidée model, and many other models around the globe are working really hard, and very large teams are working on this topic. But I'd like to emphasize that this is really an open question for the moment, which needs a lot of time and a lot of effort. Now, the other aspect of the climatic threat is that we're trying to use ground data to understand what's going on. And this is a graphic showing that, which is a bit cryptic, I apologize for this, but it shows that the carbon stocks appear to be related to climatic drivers, especially maximal temperature, daily temperature. And so if we can start to understand how the carbon storage capacity of a forest is related to an environmental driver, then we can understand how the models are working. So moving on now to the big perspective. Deforestation tells you only part of the story. You don't understand really what's going on if you only look at forest cover, because translating forest cover into carbon quantities and into the global carbon budget is difficult. Obviously, there are two aspects important in the global carbon budget. One of them is deforestation, and we've talked about this. The other one is the carbon storage capacity of forests, the fact that forests are natural sinks of carbon, which is an enormously important point. It's been recognized in Glasgow at COP26, and it's been a really central asset for mitigating climate change. I'll talk about this right now. So there's a number of approaches to quantify the carbon budget. I just want to show a couple of slides to tell you that a lot of them now rely on remote sensing capacity. And you know, atmospheric inversion techniques, which combine climate models with passive smoke models, are really important to quantify the regional budget of the globe. This is super important. It's been the bread and butter of IPCC, which Antoine Tenty just mentioned in the past 20 years. Now we can do this with remote sensing data. And the great news is that the French community with CNES and the microcarb satellite is about to contribute to this mission by launching this new microsatellite in 2022. The other approach is that emerging technologies by just serendipity is able to discover new features. So this satellite, which was designed to quantify soil moisture and oceanic salinity, was actually found to be quite useful to addressing the problem of forest carbon. Forest carbon was actually the layer of vegetation above soil that was the nuisance of the satellite moisture quantification. But it turns out that by inverting the logic, you can also use this information that was taken away in the analysis by quantifying how much carbon is in the vegetation through time. And by doing this, you can see that we can see that clearly tropical forests are a sink of carbon dioxide, and this is a really quite important feature and result that we'll try to continue. So this is again a very important achievement. Now, fast forward to forest as natural climate solutions. It's clear that locking up carbon in forest is a proven and affordable strategy for mitigating carbon emissions. But there are many ways of doing this, and I'll cite only 3 of them. One of them is plantations. This is a great win-win strategy if you think in the terms of using the carbon in terms of wood for local populations afterwards. But in terms of storage capacity, it's also only of a limited advantage. And you know that 10 years ago, the Bonn Challenge was all about plantation. Half of the pledges to the Bonn Challenge was plantation. This has limitations and that we have to bear in mind. The second option is natural forest regrowth, which is just let nature do its job and set aside space where vegetation has been degraded and let it regrow. This is philosophically an interesting option. The third option is to also protect intact tropical forests because they're accumulating naturally carbon dioxide through the feature called CO2 fertilization effect. And so this is a very important option that we should bear in mind in all of the COP26 related talks. Finally, I would like to mention that we won't do much progress without a reliable forest monitoring system, which is not only a national forest monitoring system, but a global one. So this is reliant on two key aspects. One of them is the development of global maps of forest carbon. And there are many advances using our colleagues in NASA at the USA with JEDI, the Biomass Project, which is an Earth Explorer program of the European Space Agency, and NISA, which is an ISRO, the Indian Remote Sensing Agency, and NASA. All of these are coming together in a couple years' time, and this will be a fantastic opportunity to create a new generation of maps. This would have no value whatsoever, though, if we don't have good data on the ground to validate this. So a big challenge for our community, the ground community, not the rocket scientists, is to get together and collect the data that we need to validate this remote sensing information. And I cite again the NORAG Ecological Research Station in French Guiana because it is one of the elements of this global network that we try to put in place in the name of geotrees under the auspices of geo. Finally, to conclude, I'd like to say that a couple words. One of them is that what we've done basically is to put above ground what used to be called the subterranean forest. Basically this old forest. This is a word from Rolf Zierfeldt, who used to be the late Rolf Zierfeldt, who was an advisor of the German government. And right now we are at the position where there is almost as much forest that has been taken out as fossil fuel as it is today on the ground. So we are at this level now, which is really a challenge. But any progress we have to take in mind the global perspective and not the EU perspective. So I'll leave you with just a couple seconds of conclusion, if I'm allowed. I see I'm over time, and I apologize for this. A few conclusions. The main threats to forests is not only a global climate change. It's mostly economic and political. So and these are forces that are much more difficult to combat than anyone else. The climate drivers are difficult to quantify, and the occurrences and the likelihood of tipping points is a reality that we have to study. But we have to bear in mind that these realities have to be understood in the drawback of the economic challenges. Finally, global forests are a great opportunity for combating climate change. If we can set aside large areas of regenerating tropical forest, then we have the capacity of mitigating a large extent and buy time, basically, to help the economic and social transition that we all need for our countries in the next decade. This story will be told at the end of this decade that we are in now. And so I hope we can make progress together. And thank you very much for your attention.
Stay there. Thanks, Jean. I was very interested in the plantation, about how ineffective they are, but surely they must play a role in reducing temperatures, though.
They do. They do to some extent, but in tropical forests and in tropical environments, the differences in temperature between the plantations and the savanna or open fields is actually not so large. the gradient from the ground to the atmosphere, to the lower atmosphere, is much more important. So it has a lot of implication in terms of turbulence, and I'm not the expert of this, and I'm sure some colleagues could speak better for this. But I guess that this advantage, the extra advantage, needs to be considered and could be important. But the primary advantage of a plantation needs to be storing carbon. That's the easy thing to sell and to explain to all of our partners in all the countries.
And what's the feedback on that when you talk to them?
Well, the feedback is there a win-win? How do we take advantage of this? What is the economic model? And this is something we need to come up with. There's been massive progress since Paris, the Paris Accord, about the financial aspects of the climate problem. But the key point is the global aspect is the north-south divide and the environmental justice element of it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Many of our colleagues were supposed to come here to be here present in Strasbourg, but we know that the situation is pretty delicate in some places with the virus. And so many are determined to participate, but remotely. And that's the case with our next keynote speaker, who is Stefan Remsdorf, who's from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. He looks at extreme weather and tipping points, and I believe we have him now remotely to talk to us now. Can you hear us, see us? I can see you. I can't hear you yet. Can you put your microphone on? We can't hear you. We can see you. Can you hear us now? Okay, maybe what we can do is, why don't we go to back to here, because we have our other, Samuel Morin is here. Are you ready to jump in? Okay, let's go to Samuel while we're doing. Thank you so much. Samuel is from the National Weather Research Center in Toulouse. We have a lot of people from Toulouse here today. And he specializes in assessing climate change impacts and risks in mountain ranges. Samuel, over to you.
Sure. Waiting for the slides. Well, while the slides come in, I'm very happy to be here today. I'm both from Toulouse and Grenoble, so that gives a broader perspective in the French territory. And I will walk you through an example of work that we've done about over the past decade or so, addressing and transitioning from research to services in the field of climate change impact, awareness and adaptation, walking you through the example of ski resorts. And that's not too far from here in Strasbourg. There is the Vosges Mountains, where there are ski resorts, and there are also ski resorts in southern Germany. And certainly those are the most exposed to climate change and vulnerable to some extent because of their low elevation, as we will see. So this research has been carried out in collaboration between Météo France, CNRS, INRAE, and other partners nationally and internationally. So, well, as you can imagine, and as you may have experienced, climate change has some impacts on ski tourism, and ski tourism is heavily dependent on weather conditions and on climate change in the longer term, because snow is the main resource that ski resorts build upon and draw from. And here you can see examples of when things go well, where people are happy on the slopes, and when things go not so well, when there is a lack of snow that leads to some emergency situations sometimes, or to the practice of producing snow, which is very routinely carried out now in ski resorts around the world. Well, we talked about assessing earlier today, and I'm starting here with an assessment from the IPCC Special Report on Ocean and Cryosphere, which was mentioned also earlier today. And these are extracts from the Summary for Policymakers. I don't think I need to convince you of how IPCC, of the benefits of the IPCC framework and of the relevance of the Summary for Policymakers of those reports. And I really encourage all of us to go back to those Summary for Policymakers and chapters of IPCC reports, because they are providing the state of knowledge about climate change. So it's not only policy relevant, it's also relevant for our science to build on firm foundations. So as you can see from this SPM of S-work, in nearly all high mountain areas, the depth, extent, duration of snow cover have declined over recent decades, especially at lower elevation, where we have a transition from snowfall to rainfall because of the rising temperature. And if we look at the future, in high mountain areas, there is a projected further decrease in snow conditions, especially once again at low and mid elevation, with different ranges depending on the level of global warming for the next decade. This is for natural snow. And natural snow is, of course, critical for ski resorts operation, but that's not all of the story, because snow is a resource that is managed in ski resorts through grooming, through snowmaking, and other means to work on this resource. So if you only focus on natural snow conditions, you're missing the point when you talk to those people. If we look also from the SPM about past changes and impacts of climate change to the mountains in a broader perspective, if you think of the aesthetic and cultural aspects of the mountains, they have been altered already by climate change, and they have made the situation more difficult for tourism, recreation, including ski and glacier tourism. But in some places, this SPM recognizes that artificial snowmaking has reduced some of the negative impacts of ski tourism. We're not here to judge whether it's good or bad. It's just the fact that making snow is a way to reduce the variability of snow conditions, and it has an effect on ski resorts operation. Looking to the future again from this SPM, we state in this report that current snowmaking technologies are projected to be less effective in the future because they depend on temperature. So if temperature increases, then it will be more difficult to produce snow, and depending on the temperature level that is attained, then of course the conditions will be different for this way of managing the resource. So we see here an example where an adaptation method, snowmaking, is itself dependent on the evolution of the climate, which is an interesting example, which is one of the main motivations for me to work on that topic, because it exemplifies a lot of the paradox or a lot of the issues at play when we talk about climate change impacts. And let's also not forget that tourism corresponds to about 10% of greenhouse emissions, due mostly to transportation. So there is also some feedback between emissions and impacts in the field of tourism at a global scale. Well, something that is very important as well, I think you all know about it, but I want to state and re-emphasize the interest of approaching climate change impacts through a risk framework, when of course we have to focus and better understand the hazard component to it, how climate change modifies the weather patterns, how climate change modifies the weather situations, and how they drive changes to the surface processes and also in the ocean. But of course, when we think about climate change risks, we of course need to account for vulnerability and exposure components, and that requires integrating with social sciences, other sciences, of course, to provide integrated and relevant science and information for addressing the challenges. And again, ski tourism is an example that provides ways to implement all of those components. So I would also like to before moving on to go back quicker on the latest report from the IPCC that came out in August this year, where the hazard framing from previous reports is now subtly changing, or in terms of the framing, now the working group 1 community of IPCC working on physical basis of climate changes has worked together with working group 2 people working on impacts and adaptation, and of course some of us are in between, working on climatic impact drivers, which is a way to refer to the hazard component of climate change in a way that is maybe more understandable across the disciplines. And as you can see, seasonal snow cover is the example taken in the FAQ in this IPCC report to reflect on how this climatic impact driver has an influence on a number of sectors, including ski resorts. I will now go back a little bit on how do we define, how we developed these tools and these knowledge elements to address these impacts. And of course, when we think of snow on ski slopes, as I explained, we need not only to account for natural snow processes, but also grooming and snowmaking. And this has led us to develop over the past decade a tool, or to basically implement on top of an existing snowpack model called Crocus. We implemented a module that accounts for grooming and snowmaking within the model. And that makes it possible to compute and to simulate the evolution of snow conditions on ski slopes, accounting for those practices implemented by the ski resort managers. And that basically brings together not only the physical elements of snow evolution over time, but also accounting for these modifications due to human activities. When we do this, we can then use a chain of models ranging from global climate models to regional climate models to further zooming into the mountain areas to provide the driving conditions to make those impacts simulations and to simulate the evolution of the snow cover in the future. And here is, I will not go into the details, but just to show you that doing this kind of research implies to bring together a number of elements, and I'm sure most of you are working in this kind of framework where you have to integrate across different disciplines and different elements and different expertise. And this is just an example on the climatic impact drivers component of that research that ultimately provides projections of the natural snow conditions or the managed snow conditions. Here, that is for the Vercors area close to Grenoble at 1,500 meters elevation. And we can see for the different scenarios for the greenhouse emissions, the colors are the standard ones. So red is RCP 8.5, very high emissions. Bluish is for the more oriented towards reduction or even carbon neutral at a global scale. For the dark blue, RCP 2.6, that is from the CMIP 5 generation of models. And here you can see that we can produce and we can provide projections of changes in those natural snow conditions based on this chain of models. And those are climatic impact drivers for the ski tourism. But what now needs to be done is to integrate that with representations of the ski resorts themselves. So for that, we developed a method that brings together and uses publicly available information. In France, we have a catalog of ski lifts, and that is very useful to reconstruct where ski resorts are and what are their spatial characteristics, and also working on a number of hypotheses, a number of ways to spatially integrate the information and provide indicators at the level of each ski resort that we can then project into the future. So that is basically the second half of that slide, where we compute explicitly the exposure and vulnerability of the ski resorts. And from that, we basically provide ways to compute simulations. This is for the entire French Alps, of the evolution of the snow conditions across the 21st century for different scenarios. So the different panels show a reference and then a near future in the middle, and then end of century for different climate scenarios. And you can see the change from the blue here that reflects the starting conditions, the baseline, basically the background information, that already shows that across the French Alps, not all areas are equal. Currently, the conditions are usually better in the Northern Alps than the Southern Alps, and that is a starting point. And then from this starting point, we compute how the climate evolution of future climate change has an impact on these snow reliability conditions. And the key thing that we've put quite a lot of effort in that work, besides all the technical development that I mentioned, is to characterize what are the proper indicators to refer to that change. If you're a ski resort manager telling you that the snow conditions will decrease by 10% over the next 20 years, it doesn't mean anything. Because what you're concerned with is what happens for this winter season. And now we are end of November, and people are calling our colleagues in Météo France and myself sometimes, and the media is asking, well, is there going to be some snow this winter? Of course, it's too early to say in some areas. So what matters is the conditions at the yearly scale, and how frequently we encounter conditions which are detrimental for operations. And if you think of heat waves, it's the same. A rising temperature by 1, 2, 3 degrees on average does mean nothing for heat waves. What matters is how frequently do we encounter heat waves and how severe they are. And for ski tourism, it's the same. So for that, we developed indicators that compute how frequently in the future we basically encounter conditions which are currently challenging. And if of course, we have more and more seasons which are challenging in the future, that means that the conditions are becoming further complicated. Let me introduce that on this plot, which is maybe more illustrative. So if you look at the top, this is the evolution. On the left for groomed snow only, so natural snow only grooming, and on the right is with snowmaking. And you can see that in terms of the long-term trend, the first top, the top row, we have this progressive decrease of the conditions, average over multiple years, with different scenarios. So of course the drop is quicker and stronger with only groomed snow and for the higher emission scenarios, the red ones. But this is the multi-annual perspective. If you're a ski resort manager and I tell you on average over 15 years, the conditions will decrease by 20% once again. What matters is what's happened next year, and if the conditions are bad next year, can I recover the following year, or is it going to be bad again another year? And these are the questions that ski resort managers ask us, really, in terms of how frequently the conditions become bad. And that is the second row here, the frequency of challenging winters. And for that, we developed methods that basically provide a reference snow reliability level that is encountered on average once every 5 years. And that is quite representative of a challenging snow season currently. And we can see that this frequency, which is by definition 20% for the reference period, increases very quick without snowmaking, and increases but with some delay when we account for snowmaking. So snowmaking has an influence, and this is aggregated at the scale of the entire French Alps. But of course, it comes with a cost, and in terms, in particular, of the water consumption. If you look at the lower panel, it's the water consumption for snowmaking, and this provides you a perspective about the impact of climate change on the demand of water for snowmaking that we can compute and quantify with this kind of methods. So those are aggregated at the scale of the entire French Alps. So this is basically the ski tourism industry. 90% is in the Alps, so that is for France mostly, almost. But this is, again, an aggregation. But the question is that there is a lot of heterogeneity across the ski resorts. So this is an example from a recent publication that shows for different months of the year, and each row corresponds to one particular ski resort, and not all ski resorts are equal. The one to the top are the low elevation ski resorts in the Savoie area, quite the famous ski resorts, and the one at the bottom are the higher elevation ski resorts, and the colors refer to the change in snow conditions for different months of the year for those different ski resorts between 1960 to 1990 compared to 1990 to now. So over 30 years time periods, we're comparing how frequently conditions have been bad, basically in terms of snow conditions. And what you can see is that the situation is quite different across the different ski resorts. And the biggest change, or unsurprisingly, at the beginning and the end of the season. If you look at December, if you look at January, it's actually, in many cases, an increase in the conditions. Basically, for January only, there have been less bad snow winters than in the 30 years before. So we have to be careful in not generalizing too quick in terms of those impacts. And this is only for natural snow, without snowmaking, and that is with snowmaking. And with snowmaking, what we see is that, of course, it has an influence. But when we compare the situation of the first 30 years, 1960 to 1990, compared to the last 30 years, 1990 to now, in terms of the use of snowmaking, basically shifts the baseline and shifts the conditions, but there is still a decrease at the end of the season. But again, if the most relevant period of the year is Christmas and January and February, then it's a different story than if you look at the entire winter season. And April, we can see that the situation has decreased even with snowmaking, but that may not be the most relevant period for ski resort operation. So again, we have to be quite careful in how do we define the indicators that characterize conditions in this socio-ecological system, and how do we compute the trends in a meaningful way so that it makes sense for the users. So based on this heterogeneity and the difficulty to provide a very articulate and very generalizing statements, although we do have those kind of generalizing statements, and if you go back to the IPCC report statement, it's actually very consistent with what I just showed. We've developed ways to address the questions of individual ski resorts, because decisions are made at the individual ski resorts. If you're the mayor of Gérardmer, in the Vosges here, you want to be concerned about the future of your ski resort. If you're the mayor of Val Thorens, or the municipality that hosts this very large ski resort in Savoie, you want to be concerned about what happens to your ski resort. And for that, we partnered with a small company near Grenoble, where we developed ways to integrate further information from the ski resorts, not only based now on publicly available information, but also drawing from information and questions from the ski resorts themselves. And we developed a climate service that is a set of information that provides information to users to make, as the WMO defines, climate smart decision. We can talk about what that means, but it means that at least the information is tailored to the needs and to the use of those people, and it helps deliberation at the local scale to take place. We've noticed that bringing this kind of information to the users at the local scale makes it possible for people to talk together in a context where usually it's quite a conflict between environmental protection organizations and ski resort managers. And they tend to speak better to each other when they are provided with the scientific evidence about the impact of climate change. So here are some examples. I will not go into details, but this is for the Jura Mountain, Métabier, not very far from here, where we've developed, basically we prototyped it. We prototyped this approach, and this is for one individual ski resort, what happens in the future in terms of only groomed snow or accounting for managed snow, and in terms of how frequently those bad or challenging winter seasons will come back in the future. And we can see that in this particular ski resort, which is quite low elevation in the Jura Mountains, well, with or without snowmaking doesn't make a huge difference in terms of how quickly things will be more difficult in the future. And this is key for informing local decisions and local deliberations and policies at the local scale. This is another example of output, and I have to state that I really hate the color palette here. We should not use this kind of color palette, but when we proposed the users with others, which we found it better in terms of scientific representation, they didn't like it and didn't understand. So this is really a compromise we have to make in order for people to understand the output of our research and our science, to basically also use color palettes which we would otherwise not use for our own application. So that's a projection of future changes in snow conditions for this particular ski resort, with a number of comments that help them think about the future of their ski resort. So in summary, we've developed a climate service that supports local decision-making with respect to future pathways of mountain locations, especially regarding tourism. And this is based on state-of-the-art climate change impact methods, fostered by long-term interdisciplinary studies, but brought with additional information from the local scale, so to make it more actionable at the local scale. And we've noticed that this enables a very constructive dialogue between the different parties at the local scale, and also enhanced awareness. So it's designed initially to help people think about the adaptation pathways, but in fact, we also noticed that it's also a way for people to realize what is climate change and what is it changing, and it actually has an impact also on policies acting on the emission side. So this is a map of France with all the different ski resorts which are currently or have been addressed by this service. So it's about 100 ski resorts now that have been addressed by this service. There is a lot of demand. And this is based on standardized data set and approaches. So it means that we can replicate it for different ski resorts. And we're also working on doing that at a European scale because we've developed a pan-European data set that may make it able to provide this kind of information based on Copernicus climate change service information that is now available freely online on the Copernicus data store, which makes it possible to develop further services at the European scale, and also talking with other colleagues in North America, etc. So I will stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm available here today and tomorrow morning for further discussions if you like. I'm very looking forward to seeing the other presentations for other MOBGA laureates. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samuel. The subject close to my heart. I mean, there's days where you can't actually make snow because it's actually too warm. And the data is obviously going to be used by ski resorts. You talk about the economy, everybody knows how important ski is. Do you have an idea how many slopes or ski resorts would have to close down if nothing's done by, you mentioned 2035 is a critical date.
Well, that's the question everyone asks, and I don't have the answer. Because it depends on the ski resort themselves. If you're a lower elevation ski resort, and basically you're used to the fact that it might not be possible to open the ski resort on a given year, because but basically you cope with it. You already adapt it somehow, and you have other resources. You have agriculture, you have other cultural activities that can propose to tourists if they come. And so in fact your resilience, even though I don't very much like this term, but in a way you can cope already, even though the situation is already quite critical. If you are higher up in elevation, basically you expect snow every year, more or less, but always enough currently that you can operate. But if there was no snow, you would have nothing to propose. And so in terms of the pathway of the different ski resorts and the different territories that surround them, it's a story that has to be told and designed by the parties one by one. And in terms of course, we anticipate major changes in the ski tourism industry due to climate change, but also due to other things, that the aging of the population of skiers, or the rising cost of transportation, for instance, which may be coming up due to efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So in fact, climate change is one of the different factors on climate change on ski resorts operations. And I'm definitely not telling a number about how many ski resorts will close. We can tell numbers about ski resorts where snow reliability conditions will become more critical, and of course then it boils down to the fraction of the ski resort that is below 2,000 meters elevation. But which ski resort will survive or not depends on a much larger set of factors than only climate.
Okay, let me try a different approach. Are you, with the data that you're providing, are you seeing resorts now or regions already deciding to invest less in skiing for the future as a result?
Definitely. I mean, if we think of the Métabier ski resort, I just showed the example, they are basically preparing to close down by 2030. But they want to have what we call a managed retreat. So they don't want, because if they close down immediately next winter, also the summer tourism activities will basically fall down at the same time, because it's the same people working in the ski resort, being technicians or being employees of the ski resort in the winter. They are the same people working on bikes and other activities for the summertime. So if you close down immediately, all of a sudden, basically everything breaks down. So there is a managed transition that is taking place in some areas, and this kind of service is precisely here to help the local authorities, to help the communities at the wide sense, to basically take this information into account to manage their way into the next decades.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'm pleased to say that we've managed to I'm pleased to say that we have established contact with Potsdam. So Stefan Ramstoff, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so over to you to talk to us. You're obviously an expert on extreme weather and tipping points, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, can the team bring up the title slide of my talk, please? That's not the one. Okay, you have to advance a lot of slides, actually. You haven't entered it at the right starting point. Can you maybe bring up the link again from afresh? Because it should start at the right point, which has the title of my talk about are we approaching a tipping point? So if you start the link, it was actually set up to start at the right slide. Anyway, I will just start speaking. Obviously, you are hearing me now, so that's a great progress. I'm sure we'll sort out the slides as well. From the forests and the mountains we have heard already, but I will talk about the oceans, and the presentation is about... I just mute my microphone. Okay, the presentation is about whether we are approaching a tipping point in the Atlantic overturning circulation. And there was a big article in the New York Times earlier this year, which warned of grave dangers of shutting down the Atlantic overturning circulation. And I hope the slides will come on soon. I will just progress with speaking without them for now. The kind of Gulf Stream was actually already discovered by Benjamin Franklin in the 1800s, who was the first to draw a map of the Gulf Stream. And this was because he was the postmaster at the time in London, in control of the postal ships going to the United States, the sailing ships, and he was wondering why they took so long to get to the US. And so he asked his cousin, Timothy Folger, who was a whaler, what's going on there. And he told him, well, there is a current there going against which these postal ships are constantly battling. And this is not very clever, but of course they don't listen to us stupid whalers. They keep sailing against the current. And so Benjamin Franklin decided to draw a map about this current, which we now know as the Gulf Stream. And the Gulf Stream, of course, is part of a much larger ocean circulation system in the Atlantic, and even a worldwide ocean circulation, which is driven by density differences in the seawater. And these density differences, they are caused by temperature differences and by salinity differences, so the salt content. Here we are, wonderful. Can you advance one slide now? Thank you. So that is the New York Times article that I highly recommend because it not only has a very good text, but also beautiful animations. Can we have the next slide? Here you see the Gulf Stream map by Benjamin Franklin from 1769. Next, please. And that is a modern view of what it looks like. So it's not like just one straight river in the ocean as they thought in the old days. But today we know, based, for example, on satellite data, that the ocean is very turbulent, and the Gulf Stream is a compact current up to about Cape Hatteras, where it leaves the United States coastline, and then it is broken up into a lot of little eddies. Next, please. And this is kind of a more schematic view of what it looks like in the northern Atlantic, just to point out that this is part of a larger scale circulation, which actually comes across the equator. Next, please. And this is a famous diagram based on Wally Broker, one of the great oceanographers of the 20th century. And of course, it is a highly simplified view because of the very turbulent dynamics and all these eddies that I just mentioned. But the point I want to make here is that we have a surface current shown in red here going all the way up through the Atlantic, actually from the South Atlantic up to the high northern latitudes, to these yellow dots, where the water sinks down due to its high density, which is cold water, of course, has a higher density, but also relatively high salt content, because this current actually itself brings very saline water from the subtropics to the high latitudes. And so here we have a self-amplifying, a positive feedback. This overturning circulation in the Atlantic works because there is high salinity in the high latitudes, and there is high salinity in the high latitudes because this overturning circulation is present. So we have this self-amplifying feedback, which immediately to a physicist will tell you there is probably a tipping point here at where this breaks down, and the opposite state will be self-sustaining, namely without this ocean circulation. Next, please. In Earth history, especially during the last glacial, where we have very detailed data, we know that this ocean current has not always been stable, but it has made abrupt changes. And that can be seen from these, the blue line, for example, which are data from the Greenland ice core, the grip core in this case, and they show the last 60,000 years, where the Holocene, the last 10,000 years is off this graph actually. But you can see that, well, just especially if you look at the second half here, you see a pretty cold base state. These are temperatures. And then you see these spikes going up. These are so-called Dansgaard-Oeschger events. They are sudden warming events where temperatures increased on Greenland to the tune of at least about 5 degrees within about a decade. So these are truly shocking, abrupt events, which then they lasted about 1,000 years until it went back to the cold state. And so these events are numbered here. The green line, they are sediment data from the northern Atlantic showing ocean temperatures. And you can see there is a very close correspondence of these abrupt events above Greenland, the Greenland summit, and thousands of kilometers away in the northern Atlantic. And that shows they are not some local Greenland atmospheric phenomenon, but they are very large-scale regional events. And we think we understand the main reason there now. Next, please. Can I get the next slide? Yeah. The reason for these warm events, and there is a lot of evidence from sediments, etc., that this is what's happening, is that the normal glacial climate state is shown on the left here. You have a grossly simplified conveyor belt overturning circulation here, which during the Ice Age actually didn't reach into the Nordic seas as today, but stopped south of Iceland. We didn't have deep water formation up here in the normal glacial state, which is called stadials. But during these Dansgaard-Oeschger events, called DO events here, deep convection started up in the Nordic seas, and so this warm current pushed further north and caused this warming pattern, which also affected Greenland and gave a big flush to the overturning. And we can simulate this. We actually showed this in the early 2000s in model simulations, that you can trigger this instability of the Atlantic overturning between the deep water formation and this warm current reaching only to south of Iceland, and the second state where it reaches north of Iceland into the Nordic seas. And so this is how we can understand these Dansgaard-Oeschger events. Next, please. So the big question is, what is happening now where we are going through an unprecedented global warming, which is unprecedented throughout the Holocene, and you actually have to go back at least 120,000 years to the Eemian interglacial to find higher global temperature than now. So what does it actually do to the Atlantic Ocean circulation, which has proven to be liable to instabilities in the past? Next, please. And there is one clue there if we look at the map of temperature trends since the beginning of the 20th century. So basically this is your global warming trend here, but there's global warming on almost everywhere on the whole globe, but not quite everywhere. There's like a Gallic village resisting the warming trend. Next, please. And this is, of course, metaphorically, it's not a village, but it's a region in the northern Atlantic, south of Greenland and Iceland, which has actually cooled since 1900, or since the late 19th century. It's the only region on Earth that has cooled. And yeah, that's good to see that slide. Here we see what happens in a very high-resolution climate model with an extremely high-resolution ocean component, a global climate model. It's modeled by the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory in Princeton. What happens there when you increase carbon dioxide in the model? And this is the sea surface temperature change that you get. And everything that's blue has either warmed less than the average or actually cooled, and everything that's orange and red has warmed more than the global average sea surface. And this is a very peculiar pattern. And in the model, of course, we have the complete information. We know exactly what's happening there. We're like gods in a climate model, accessing everything. And so we know this is a fingerprint pattern of a slowdown of this Atlantic overturning circulation. And this is also understood theoretically. Of course, it's easy to understand why this region south of Iceland and Greenland would cool, because simply less heat is brought into that region if the overturning slows down, which has a huge heat transport going to the north attached to it. It's a bit more complicated to explain why this slowdown simultaneously leads to this warming of the North American East Coast here, but that's also dynamically understood. It's a result of where the deep current that goes southward crosses underneath the Gulf Stream, and when that whole system weakens for reasons of angular momentum conservation on a rotating globe, the Gulf Stream moves closer inshore. And this is why you see this peculiar pattern with a strong warming and actually see some cooling south of it, because the Gulf Stream basically has shifted further north here. Next, please. This is the observed trend in comparison. Of course, we have only a very fuzzy picture of the observed trend because we don't have complete time series information at every single grid point here, but only when ships happen to have made measurements. And so it's a blurry picture, but I think you can see a very striking pattern here in the Northern Atlantic, which looks very much like this fingerprint of a slowdown of the Atlantic overturning. And my PhD student, Lev Geseza, who made this analysis, was able to publish this in Nature in 2018. Next, please. Since then, a lot of sediment core analysis have been published, which we compiled in a new publication this year in Nature Geoscience. And on the left panel, you see the overturning circulation as derived from the sediment cores. The regional pattern is shown on the top right here. These are all the data points that have been used for this analysis, and where all these different time series come from. For example, this blue line is from a paper from 2015 in Nature Climate Change, where we used data from Michael Mann about temperatures for the last millennium, and that can be translated with the same kind of approach with this cold blob in the Northern Atlantic into a change in the Atlantic overturning. If we just look at the difference between the Northern Atlantic and the rest of the globe, and then we get a pretty stable evolution of the Atlantic overturning and then the strong decline. The light blue line is this study by my PhD student Lev Geseza, showing the kind of decline since the late 19th century. This next curve, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the next curve is a sorted silt curve by Tornelli et al. And sorted silt is looking at the grain size at the bottom of the Atlantic, where this deep southward branch of the overturning passes over. And it's a well-known phenomenon that you can even observe at beaches when you visit a beach, that the grain size depends how dynamic the environment is. On a beach, it's mainly to do with waves, but on the ocean bottom, it has to do with the current speed, and so the grain size gets smaller when there is less current. And indeed, this is what this curve is showing. It shows, if that's a measure of the deep branch of the overturning circulation, it shows a stable overturning circulation for centuries and then this 20th century decline. And there are very further curves with totally different methods, always giving a pretty consistent picture. And this is just a zoom into the last about a bit more than 100 years, 150 years or so, where we see the high resolution proxies. They're kind of consistent as well. And so there is increasing evidence that the overturning circulation hasn't only weakened in the last century, but actually is at the weakest for at least a millennium, which is what the title of our paper there says. Next slide, please. And one of the reasons for this is that there's not only surface warming, but there's also a freshening. And I already mentioned the important role of the salt content, salinity of the ocean in determining its density. And if the water gets diluted by meltwater from the Greenland ice sheet, then the salinity goes down, which is also an observational fact. The density is reduced, and so it cannot sink as vigorously as it used to, because it's the fact that the surface waters reach a very high density because of cooling mainly, which makes them sink in the first place. And you weaken that whole process, the so-called deep water formation process, by meltwater, but also by increasing precipitation with an enhanced water cycle in a warming world. Melting sea ice also enters fresh water, and so on. Next slide. And I mentioned that this is a self-sustaining system which has a tipping point, as systems with positive feedbacks generally do. And this is part of a whole array of tipping points tipping elements, as we call them, in the climate system. We published a review recently in Nature 2 years ago about the current state of tipping point research. And you see the Atlantic circulation here is in the center. And what this diagram points out is interactions between the tipping points. I have already mentioned that Greenland melting does weaken the Atlantic circulation. And Greenland itself, as an ice sheet, has a tipping point because it also has a positive feedback, a self-sustaining feedback, which in this case is the fact that the Greenland ice sheet is 3,000 meters thick. And that's why its surface is very cold and doesn't melt, because it's at 3,000 meters altitude, much of it. Think of the ski resorts and the mountains. Of course, the higher up in the atmosphere you go, the colder it gets. And so if you took away the Greenland ice sheet today, it would never form again, because then at sea level, Greenland is too warm to form an ice sheet. Snow would melt there. But this is a remnant of the last ice age, and because it's there, it has a cold surface because it's so thick and so on. So it's a self-sustaining thing again. And if Greenland melts down, it will progressively, the surface will automatically move into warmer and warmer areas of the atmosphere. And there's a critical point there from which the complete loss of the Greenland ice sheet will become inevitable and self-sustaining, which will lead to 7 meters of global sea level rise and a lot of meltwater going into the Atlantic. And that's why in this paper we wrote that the clearest emergency situation would be if we were approaching a global cascade of tipping points which basically tip each other like dominoes do. And this is not some outlandish speculation, but it is a real concern. For example, also from paleoclimatic proxy data, we know that change in the Atlantic circulation, if it breaks down, this shifts the tropical rainfall belts to the south because it makes the northern hemisphere cooler with respect to the southern hemisphere, and that can destabilize parts of the Amazon rainforest and so on. So these tipping points are interconnected. This is the main message here. Next slide, please. For the Atlantic Ocean circulation, this has been shown in numerous studies. I wrote a review article on this topic in Nature in 2002. It's hard to believe, but almost 20 years ago now. This shows on the vertical axis the strength of this Atlantic overturning, so it's called here North Atlantic deepwater flow, and on the horizontal axis how much fresh water enters the Northern Atlantic. And we're on this upper branch here somewhere, so if you add fresh water, you move to the right in the equilibrium, and the circulation weakens, as we believe it has done. But at some point, because of that self-amplifying feedback, this leads to a quadratic equation if you solve the most simple equations for this system. And so this curve bends back on itself. It's a parabola, and you can't go further here. You will fall down to this lower branch, which then has a self-stabilizing switched off North Atlantic overturning circulation. This actually, I call this Stommel bifurcation because Henry Stommel already described this tipping point of the Atlantic overturning in the 1950s. Next, please. So the key $1,000 or million or billion-dollar question, probably more likely, is: are we close to this tipping point? I've tried to find out actually for about 3 decades that I've been working on this, and we haven't found an answer to this question because basically we use climate models to see what happens if you add CO2 or fresh water, so how stable is the circulation. And the climate models are all over the place in this respect. So they have very different stability of the Atlantic overturning. And that's not a surprise because this is a very non-linear effect by definition, because it's a tipping point. And so it depends on subtle differences in the salinity distribution, the density distribution in the Atlantic, the changes in fresh water, which now means changes in rainfall patterns as well, which are very difficult to get exactly right in climate models. And that's why the stability of these models differs a lot. And some show actually a weakening for the past, the history until now, as we have deduced from this fingerprint pattern. But most models are actually more stable than that and don't even show until today a change in the overturning, but only in the future. And a few models don't even show a weakening until 2100. Another whole large group of models shows a very strong weakening by half until 2100, but we don't really know where the tipping point is. And until very recently, I have thought we would be very unlikely to actually cross it this century, and especially not if we limit warming to less than 2 degrees. But a new study was published a couple of months ago by my colleague Niklas Börs from the Potsdam Institute, who has looked at various early warning signals. This is a branch of nonlinear physics that has been going on for many years outside climate, namely investigating what are precursor signs when you approach a tipping point, and they involve changes in the fluctuations in a system. And this is what Niklas has analyzed here in different data curves. You saw these different data indicator curves here. The left panel shows temperature indicators like that fingerprint pattern in the cold blob south of Greenland and others. And the right-hand curve here shows salinity signals. There are different indices have been defined where you can deduce from salinity patterns in the Atlantic how the Atlantic overturning is doing. And the point is, all these curves have an upward trend. And with this indicator that Niklas has used here, the tipping point is where the zero line is reached. And this was actually quite shocking to me to see in some of these curves, it's already around 2000, in others maybe 2020, or the red one somewhere later in the 21st century. And likewise, these salinity indicators, it's possible, according to some of these indicators, that we are already at a tipping point. We wouldn't see a big difference. It's not like the day after tomorrow where the circulation would suddenly break down when it's close to a tipping point. It would just kind of continue weakening as it is now, plus natural fluctuations, so it might recover for another decade or whatever. You wouldn't see what's happening, but it would be the point from which it becomes self-sustaining. Okay. And so this is, once you've crossed that, you can't do anything about it.
We need to sum up. We're running out of time,
That's actually, the next one is my last slide.
Okay.
Can you bring that up? Thanks, which is just showing an example of one study where with a regular global warming scenario, one of these RCP warming scenarios, the collapse, the Atlantic overturning actually crosses the tipping point and already in the 21st century and collapses. In this case, the authors have actually applied a flux adjustment or salinity adjustment in the Atlantic, which is, of course, from a point of view of physics, not ideal, because you meddle with the physics, with the basic equations of the model. But this was to correct biases in the salinity distribution in the Atlantic to make it more realistic. And by making that more realistic, the overturning became much less stable and actually collapsed in a regular global warming scenario. The temperature pattern that results from that looks like this. You'd get the cold blob, which is now just over the ocean south of Greenland and Iceland, would expand here and engulf some parts of northwestern Europe, including Britain, which would then actually be getting cooler within an otherwise warmer planet. And next slide. That's actually, my thank you slide.
We need to come to the end. Are you?
And so thank you for your attention. And yeah, I hope it was interesting. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And with that, let's go straight to our fourth key speaker, who's in Berlin, and it's Claudia Kempfert. Claudia, can you hear us? Can you see us?
I can't hear you now.
No. Claudia?
That's not Berlin. A problem.
I can see Claudia. I can't hear you.
I can hear you. And,
Can you put your microphone on? You can hear her? Just to recap, Claudia is head of Energy, Transportation and Environment Department at the German Institute for Economic Research in Berlin, and she's the go-between in science, economics and political fields and provides recommendations for government action. Claudia, can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you. And I try to speak louder. Is this working? Let me see whether...
You have to put your microphone on.
Yeah, I did my...
Okay, we're done. I can hear you. So it's over to you. We're ready to hear from you.
Good. So thanks a lot for having me, and thanks also for being online. It's a great pleasure to talk after the very interesting climatologists and showing all the insights on the tipping points on the climate. I have also some slides and would like to show them, and I would like to ask the organizers to offer to share my screen if this is feasible. That's hopefully working. I cannot do that right now because let me see, there's an echo again. That's not because of me. I'm just talking further. So I hope that probably they can offer that I can share my screen as well, so you can see my slides as well. And with trying to fix that, I just wanted to thank you again for having me. And I'm an economist, a social scientist, and I would like to talk about tipping points as well, but not from the climate point of view, but from the economic point of view. And that was the initial...
Dr. Kempfer, we don't have your slides.
Yeah.
We don't have your slides, apparently. So if you could, can you show them yourself?
I tried to show them myself, but it shows that I cannot share my screen because the organizers did not allow me to do so. And this was, I was hoping that you can just allow me so I can share my screen. And I'm seeing that you tried to do so. And with this, I just wanted to continue. I mean, I'm an economist. I wanted to add that I will talk about costs and tipping points as well. And in trying to offer also that the screen can be shared, or just continue with my talk.
Yeah, just pretend the slides are there.
Say it again, please.
Pretend the slides are there and just talk us through it.
Yeah, exactly. So I will do so. And as we have already heard this morning, and I wanted to add that I will not talk about tipping points on the climate change again, but that's obviously a very important tipping point. I wanted to add also other tipping points, and that's I would like to reinterpret a little bit the word that you know from the climate science related